Orville City. Self-care Sunday. Yo. I'm like self-care on Sundays with a day off on Monday. Private jet on the runway, taking off, going one way to the top. Whoa. Who said the sky is the limit when I'm high is my vision? On Facebook Live, going live in a minute. Don't mind me, I'm just minding my business. Breaking news, doing interviews, but it's not about me, I'm doing this for you. Matter of fact, no, I'm doing this for proof that a self-care Sundays and dreams come true. Really do.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning into today's episode of Self-Care Sundays. We're here with Jerico, editorial director at Girlboss, host of the self-service podcast, tarot reader, and student of astrology. But before we get started with Jerico, I wanted to ask for your help supporting the podcast via Patreon. Patreon allows supporters of the show to donate a monthly amount to help with our costs, such as monthly maintenance fees, and to pay our audio engineer. We'd also like to raise enough money to hire a transcription service to make our episodes more accessible to everyone. If you'd like to help us out, please check out patreon.com/selfcaresundays. That's patreon.com/selfcaresundays podcast. Thank you in advance. It's the generosity of our listeners that helps this information be accessible to so many people in the first place. Let's get started. How are you, Jerico?
Hi, I'm really good. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. So I'm wondering, as we just to kind of get started, if you could maybe talk us through a typical day in your life and kind of help us think through where self-care plays a role for you.
Sure. Admittedly, I wish self-care played a bigger role in my life. It's really ironic because I have a self-care podcast as well, but I have so much work to do in this space. But right now it kind of looks like waking up, stretching. I have to stretch my neck and shoulders a lot because I have chronic migraines, and stretching 6 times a day is really helpful. It's also just really arduous. I have to do it for about 10 minutes first thing in the morning, but I do a lot of stretching. I also have a smoothie that my girlfriend usually makes me every morning, which is, I'm so lucky. I try and have something to eat. I wish I could eat more breakfast before going to work every day, but I kind of just have some yogurt or something. And then I go to work and from there it gets really hectic, and I try and eat I want to eat 5 or 6 meals a day because, again, going back to migraines, that's really, really important for me. And I have a huge water bottle at my desk that everyone makes fun of me for because it's so large. So I'm drinking a lot of water and eating a lot of snacks. And then I'm kind of just taking breaks when I need to go to the bathroom and stretch into these weird positions without anyone seeing me. So they're the main things. I also, throughout the day, just need to take breaks and rest my eyes and things like that. Just to be able to get out of my seat and move is really helpful as well. So I'll kind of just do a quick loop around the block, or we're lucky enough to have a little bit of greenery outside. So I'll just sit outside and look up at a tree or something. I also try and just take 10 to 20 minutes a day to just fuck around, for lack of a better word. Every day I'll go on YouTube and watch an astrology video because one of my favorite astrologers is on YouTube. Her name's Deborah Silverman, and she does a forecast every 2 days. And I also have my favorite tarot reading YouTube channels. And so there's a lot of stuff that I want to catch up on, and that kind of just feels like a nice indulgent thing to do, and just a way to get outside of my own mind a little bit when I'm thinking about how I'm approaching my day with some external kind of advice. So that's really nice. And then I'll kind of just go home, and nighttime for me is kind of the biggest self-care time. So I have a bath every night, no matter how hot it is in LA, I have a bath. Because for me, that's really the time when I get to be as mindful as I can be in a normal kind of working day. So I try and meditate or just do a little bit of visualization while I'm in the bath, and just be alone and try and just have candle on. I also try and do a little bit of cooking, a bit of tarot. I'm writing a book right now, so I'm not sticking to this very well. But the bath time thing is really important, and having nighttime tea and stuff just to unwind, because it's almost at the end of the day I'm able to kind of process the entire day, and it's not necessarily always in a positive way. I can find that the build up throughout the day leads to me feeling a lot of nervous energy at night, and I want to be able to switch off my brain and make sure that my jaw is really, I have a lot of jaw tension, and so I'm trying to loosen every like part of my body up as much as I can before going to bed, basically. And then I love sleep. That's like my favorite thing to do. So I want to get like a minimum of 8 hours every day if I can. Yeah, so that's kind of it in a nutshell. I really just try and take care of my basic needs and make sure that I'm kind of feeling inspired on like a spiritual level with a little bit of like woo-woo stuff in there as well.
So it sounds like there's like this mix of, as you said, the kind of physical part of it where you're kind of being mindful about how your body's feeling, as you said, the spiritual part of it, and then kind of also, interestingly, just making sure that you're taking time to like take a break and like do something fun, and that's not like not scheduled and kind of built into your day. And so I don't know a ton about astrology, and I don't think we've actually ever had anyone on the podcast discussing astrology before. So yeah, so astrology is definitely, I think, become a huge trend. You see a lot of people talking about it on social media, and I was wondering if you could kind of talk about just really like the basics of what astrology is, what tarot is, and also just the role that it plays in your life, and, you know, kind of just helping us think through what that is and why, if you have an opinion on why it's become so popular.
Both of those things, like for me, what they have in common is like they're just archetypes, you know, they're systems of knowledge, whether you kind of like wholeheartedly believe in them or how you believe in them. I think they're just, you know, a mirror for like personal development, and a lot of like, you know, different lineages, like all over the world, they have these certain kind of, you know, archetypes and mythologies and ways of kind of like explaining the human condition, I guess. So I really see it like that. I think they're like tools or like prompts to really kind of like dive a little bit deeper, like into your own like ego and your, you know, history and the issues you're dealing with, and kind of like finding inspiration as to kind of like how to navigate those things. So for me, like it's just a very easy language through which to like work on myself. So I think that even like aside from all the woo-woo belief associated with it, I think it's like a really good tool that like anyone could kind of like see through that lens. And that's, you know, a lot of like Jungian psychologists love it for that reason. And
just to ask a clarifying question. So in that way, do you think it's like less about whether or not you actually believe in what you're being told through astrology, and more as a way to kind of give you some distance and kind of help you observe and evaluate yourself?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the latter above all else. And the former is really kind of like a bonus depending on, you know, what else you're working with in terms of like your spirituality or your faith or your, you know, basic like humanistic kind of principles that motivate you and to feel connected with like every other human being on the planet, you know? So yeah, I definitely think that it's something that is applicable to everybody in that way. And I think, I mean, the trend part of it is tricky. We're like living in a time where a lot of people feel disempowered and they want to like find a source of, yeah, like inspiration or hope or something to kind of like delve into and keep them going, or something to believe in that doesn't really require like subscribing to an institutional or dogmatic or like power-based system of belief, you know? And I feel like tarot, astrology, like all these things, they're historically kind of belittled, I guess, and seen as like a little bit like silly or whatever, because they fall outside of that system. You know, they're not like these like white patriarchal creations. They're, you know, based on like midwifery and like old systems of knowledge that came before all that stuff. So I think that for whatever personal reason, like people are kind of trying to reclaim that and see that as like a potential like way for them to, I don't know, like fulfill a role in their life that maybe like, you know, religion would have filled for our you know, parents and grandparents and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I also think, and I'm curious if it's your kind of perception that because people are increasingly kind of moving away from traditional religion as well, that it becomes a place to like have shared language and shared community, and it just feels like maybe there's a guiding force without, as you're saying, all the baggage attached to it.
Yeah, I really do. And I don't think it takes away the beauty of it to say that, at least in my experience, I think that these kind of practices and beliefs attract people that need that strength, like they need something to like look to and lean on and have an experience with, where they can like articulate like their trauma or their experience in a way that makes sense to them and gives them that same feeling, of belonging, community, and just kind of, I guess, like connectedness with everybody around them.
Yeah, totally. And there is something kind of, I guess, for all of us, nice about thinking that like maybe there's some mysterious force in the world that's guiding us.
Yeah.
And whether you call that like God or your sign or like whatever it is, there's just, it is, I think, inherently comforting to think there's something larger at work.
Very comforting. And when you're in like a really dark place, like I think that's the thing that can make a huge difference to how you like process that. And I think, almost like, with Alcoholics Anonymous, they have a very strong like spiritual focus throughout the whole program. And I think it's because they kind of see that as something about that kind of like the redemptive power of spirituality, for like lack of a better word, that really drives people to live in a way that like, I don't know, that maybe they just need at that time.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I'm wondering how you found your way to astrology and kind of the broader habits that you described generally.
Yeah. Good question. It was always kind of around, and I was always just super into it. Like I remember there being like an old set of tarot cards at like my dad's girlfriend's house at one point, and I would like play with them and think they were so cool. But I was just one of those kids that was like obsessed with like magic and fairies and stuff. So I used to like, and I grew up like in the, like when I was like a preteen, it was like the 90s. And so it was like the craft and all that stuff. So it was like the kind of new age, like trendy first wave. So I was like catching that wave, and I was at the library like looking at books that were kind of almost targeted to like young women about witchcraft and things like that. So yeah. I just kind of like always was interested in it, but I wasn't like as open about it as I am now, because I have like this podcast as a platform to talk about it, and I just give less shits. But yeah, there was definitely like a period for like the latter half of my 20s where I was like, I'm a professional, like I don't talk about that stuff at work, kind of, So it was like I had to step out of like the broom closet, so to speak, and be like, yeah, actually, like I'm just obsessed with magic and what of it.
That's so awesome. That's like such an interesting conception that like I don't know if shame is the right word, but because that kind of describes something internal, but there's certainly judgment, it sounds like, associated with it. And I wonder how you see that and maybe some of the other kind of self-care habits that you have kind of being related to your identity. I'm wondering if you feel like some of that external judgment or concern about external judgment is gendered in some way or racialized or kind of any of those isms.
Yeah. I really think that it is all of them in one way or another, because the way that I kind of feel about some of the stuff that I like believe and like practice now and like how witchy it is, it's almost like what I'm scared of is like the same reaction that I would have to, talking to kids in like, middle school about how, like, my mum's Egyptian and she has all these superstitions, and, I would wear like evil eyes and people would be like, what is that? You're crazy, And then, yeah, like in terms of my identity in other ways, like aside from being like Egyptian, having like a very superstitious family that obviously is quite religious, but also has a lot of these, for lack of a better word, like wives' tale like traditions, is like the gender and sexuality aspect of it. Because for me, like I really thrive believing in like a power greater than myself, but I didn't feel like I had a place in like the institutions or in the environments that like I grew up in. So, like I'm not Catholic, but I went to a Catholic school and, I saw all this stuff, and I felt like my kind of like private interest in magical witchy things was like this this real safe space where, you know, women were powerful and there wasn't any kind of like shame or judgment or rules or, you know, interloping forces that would come and like take that power away. Like it was just kind of like the place that I felt most at home. And I still kind of think, I mean, yeah, like the whole kind of philosophy of, obviously there's like so many different kinds of like people that practice magic and like esoteric arts and witchcraft and all of that stuff, but it's the most welcoming place that I've ever encountered in real life or online when it comes to people's gender and sexuality and like cultural backgrounds, because it's something that's kind of universal and you manifest in different ways. But, you know, like you have, like in LA, like I've made friends with brujas, you know, and they're like practicing like witchcraft in their tradition. And it really feels just kind of like a community made up of outcasts, you know, self-identified outcasts in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And it's also interesting because you mentioned that the origins, a lot of these practices are rooted, I forget exactly how you refer to it, but like in kind of traditional cultural practices where it's like this idea of, you mentioned both midwives, but also just like this idea of like ancient knowledges or cultures. And I feel like there's, you know, we see this with, as people talk about like indigenous cultures, that it's like, you know, there were these practices that worked for people and felt like provided them comfort and kind of, I think you had referred to it as like ancient knowledge. And then it was like folks needed to be civilized, quote unquote, right?
Yeah.
And that's like a very racialized, colonial kind of framing of it. And it seems like that kind of intersects with this as well.
Yeah, it really does. There's, you know, nowhere on the planet, I think, that the project of like ridding cultures of their like knowledge systems and beliefs wasn't like very like systematic and intentional, and in a really large part for a long time, like I think a lot of people thought effective, but it survives and, you know, it's surviving and people are reclaiming it. And I think that like our generation's in a place to do that in like a way that nobody's ever been able to do that before. So it really makes sense to me that like people are re-looking at these practices and reclaiming their identity in these ways. And of course, now, you know, you have the threat of cultural appropriation and assimilation of these practices in ways that aren't necessarily like healthy for their survival, which is like a new kind of threat that we're dealing with. But I think that, yeah, it's very true. I think that kind of like colonization of this stuff is in a way like still happening in the way that it's kind of in a mainstream kind of conversation setting, I guess, still kind of like delegitimized.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also like delegitimized by whom and like from whom, right? Like it's like, I'm sure like the people who listen to your podcast don't like think it's very legitimate. That's why they listen to it. Like,
yeah. Even it's funny because, you know, with the whole like trend of astrology and all of these things, and like there's a lot of stories about like witches doing like binding spells against Trump and everything when he came into power, and the way that think pieces and like coverage was kind of like the tone of that coverage for a large part was just like, look at this kooky, wacky bunch of silly people that like think that this is worth their time. You know what I mean? It was like, oh, like Gen X, like they're crazy. It was like quite dismissive. So I think like out in the world, it's still really, that's still like an ever present thing.
Yeah. And what's interesting to me about that is that like, so this is not an area where I'm particularly knowledgeable or astute, but I just don't understand why, you know, like people go to protests, people call their members of Congress, right? And like one could question fairly the efficacy of any of those practices. One could question the theory of change behind calling like a super right Republican senator and like, is that more effective, or is trying to like, you know, cast a spell more effective? I don't know. Like they seem really unlikely to listen to anything I would have to say.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting because it's the act of casting the spell that's probably just one of like a few things that could happen from doing that, you know, like the kind of like gathering is probably the more important thing. Like it's a form of protest to like publicly like cast a spell. So I think that like the statement that's being sent is probably just as effective as the spell itself, like not to be like a party pooper on like the actual like impact of those spells, but it's like the spell, but then it's also just like being engaged enough to be thinking of like protest in that way, and stepping like a little bit like outside of the box and thinking, oh, this is something that I can do, that, along with like very practical, like tried and tested steps, like calling somebody up on the phone. It can't hurt, and that's the biggest thing for me, that it's like, it can't hurt. Like, why not at least just like let people like do what they want to do?
Yeah, totally. And I'm curious, you had mentioned earlier about how you felt like you had to kind of hide this piece of yourself for a period of time. And I'm wondering if you feel like, whether it's identities or this belief system that kind of created challenges for you as a woman in media.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it was just like my own like fear around just like speaking my truth, because of how I thought that it would go, and not really like stepping back and being realizing that like in the scheme of things, this is really like quite fine, and like who cares?
Yeah.
If people are a little bit like, oh, whatever, and, especially now when it is like trendy and everything, like it just so happens to be like a very like opportune time and like a very like safe environment to do that in, in the situation that I am in now with work. So it would be really weird, not to. I feel like there's people out there that have a lot of like very legitimate reasons to not speak about any kind of like new age or like witchy beliefs or practices that they have. So, for me, I think it was just like my kind of hesitation was like, oh yeah, like I'm supposed to be a journalist, like I'm an editorial director, like I'm supposed to be this like beacon of objectivity, and I shouldn't be talking about this stuff anyway. Like it just seems like so trivial or something. But yeah, I really just think that that's kind of like, that was my own self-doubt, and probably a little bit of my kind of experience of up until this point in life of feeling like an outsider in all these other ways, because of my like sexuality and culture, and you just being a woman in media in general. So I think that kind of compounded my like hesitancy, but in the end I was just like, get over yourself. It's not a big deal.
Do you think kind of having to be silent about the ways that we take care of ourselves or things that are important to us, like in the workplace, how do you think that kind of impacts our ability to do our work? Like, I'm sure I'm asking because I recently like changed jobs, and I just feel like being able to show up as your whole self actually makes a really big difference.
Yeah, I think so too. Feeling like you're really seen and heard and appreciated as like your complete and whole self is a really big motivator, like for me. And not having that can be really just a bummer and like super unfulfilling. I think we have like so much pressure on us to be productive, and have productivity feel like that's our yardstick of like how we measure ourselves and our worth. And it's really unfortunate because like I think the opposite is true. Like feeling that you're worthy, like before anything else, like aside from what you're doing, means that like the work that you're doing is going to be like naturally like stronger and like infused with a lot more self-belief. And on a personal level, like I feel much more motivated to like do a good job because I know that I'm valued and I have a responsibility to do my best, than just feeling like you're like on a conveyor belt of just like working your butt off and not really being able to get off because like God forbid like something happened to you, and instead of your boss saying like you need to rest and look after yourself, they say like, oh well, that's annoying, like let me know when you're back online kind of thing. So yeah
no, totally.
Yeah, it's like really, really crucial. And I think that like as like young people, we have like more and more kind of like words and the language and the ability to talk about these things in a work setting. I think that like the world of work really, really needs to catch up because like our bosses don't have self-care literacy. And no matter like what we're dealing with, like physically, mentally in our lives, like we need to be able to like speak to our bosses and know that they'll understand and listen. And even if they don't understand, they'll do something about it. So I think we're at a really interesting time with that stuff because I feel like some places really get it and are very like responsive and adaptive. And then other places just don't. And being from Australia, like the work culture there is very different. It's just a little bit more, there's a bit more value placed on rest. You know, we have like 4 weeks a year that are compulsory vacation time. And I think just like little things like that that was a big kind of like culture shock for me coming to America, because I was like, oh, nobody takes vacations ever. Great.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think the United States is so different compared to other Western industrialized nations in that way?
Yeah, I'm honestly not sure. I think it's like the Protestant work ethic, like combined with a genuine need for work and money, you know, like there's not universal healthcare, like there's not the kind of same welfare systems that are like set up in other places. So it's almost like a chicken or the egg thing, but I just feel like there's this kind of like need to like keep going and keep working. And then on top of that is, you know, all like the ideology stuff where it's like, as long as you work harder and faster and better, like you can be anything and there's no limit to like what you can do. Whereas I think like somewhere like Australia, and obviously it's like a huge generalization, but there's a bit more of a focus on, you know, like the welfare like of the individual, and it's slightly more anti-authoritarian. So like the union culture there is really strong. So if people didn't get that time, they'd be very upset about it.
Yeah, I think that kind of idea of like the double-edged swordness of the American dream is really interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'd never been to the States before I moved here. I just kind of like got on a plane and was like, I hope I like it. So like seeing the way that people work here, it feels very, very different. And it's true that like the opportunities are there, but like statistically, like how there are they? Like, I don't know. I feel like people are really hustling themselves like into the ground on this like dream, and I don't necessarily know if that's like a sustainable way to kind of like live your life.
Yeah, or if it's like an optimal way to live your life, right? It's like, yes, all of us might get, you know, like somewhere that we want to be, but like you can always do more and do better. Like at what point do you just say like, I would really like to sit on the beach?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's really interesting. I was talking to my friend the other day about like the idea of just like medium ambitious. Like we're told like as like millennial women that like we can be anything, we can be as ambitious as we want, and like that's great, but it's like what if I just want to sit on the beach? Like what if I want to finish work at 5 every day and go home and like feed my cat, you know?
Yeah, that's a different kind of ambition, but I don't think it's any less valuable.
No, yeah, it is ambitious in its own way, because, you know, having that kind of time is like the ultimate luxury, really. Like how many of us can do that?
I know so many people, I feel like, from law school where it's like you're making so much money, but like you have no time to spend it. So what is even the point?
Yeah. It's really interesting. And I feel like I changed my mind on that a little bit, like here and there, even still. Like when I was younger, I was just going really, really hard, and now I'm kind of trying to find the balance more. But then there's days where I'm like, oh, no, this is fun. And then there's other days where I'm really just like, what is the point? And I think that that's fine. Like there's really no like static way that like people should approach this stuff, because it's so just dependent on what else is going on with you. Yeah. And so like just letting it feel like something flexible and like it's not a big deal, and not placing any kind of like worth on it either way, I think is the key.
Yeah, totally. So as a final question, what is a self-care habit that you're working on developing?
Ooh, God, a lot. I think I have like, it's like a New Year's resolution list. Like you have all these things and then you like beat yourself up for not doing them, which is like so bad. I really love yoga, but I don't do it a lot because, you know, I'm so just like sensitive to all kinds of stuff. Like I'll go to a yoga studio and the music will give me a migraine, or like the smell. So I'm still trying to find like the perfect yoga studio that feels really inclusive and lovely and like not too strenuous. LA is like full of those kind of yoga studios that are like, it's incredibly hot and fast and there's like hip hop playing, and that's like amazing, but I'm so just looking to relax.
Yeah.
So
I exclusively do rejuvenating yoga. Like I exclusively do like restful yoga, restorative yoga.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I just need restorative or nothing. I know. So I really want to do more yoga. I think that's like, I've seen the benefits of that, but it's just a matter of like time really is the biggest thing. So it's a lesson in like boundaries for me to be able to be like, no, it's yoga day to day and like stick to that. Because that's one of the things, like yoga and Tai Chi are the two things that I found that I like really, really enjoy.
Yep.
So that's my goal.
I think that's a great goal. Thank you so much for sharing. As we close out, I would like to thank our listeners for listening to another episode of Self-Care Sundays. And before we wrap up, I want to offer a special shout out to our patrons on Patreon. Their generosity makes our show possible and are a huge reason why you're hearing this episode today. We are especially grateful for the support of our super contributors, Vicky B, Reno J, Brady K, Bill S, and Ember Shot. If you'd like to support the show and hear your name at the end of the episodes, please check out patreon.com/Self-Care Sundays podcast. That's patreon.com/Self-Care Sundays podcast. Also give us a follow on Twitter at Self-Care Sundays and on Facebook at Self-Care Sundays. Jerico, thank you again so much for joining us on Self-Care Sundays. It was so fun having you here. Where can the audience find you on social media?
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. I love talking to you, Aditi. I'm on Instagram at Jerico Mandybur. I think it's Jerico.Mandybur actually. And I'm on Twitter at Jerico_M.
Great. I would like to thank the person who made our show art, Leah Horowitz, and the amazing artists who make our show music, For Real City. On behalf of our producer, Jess Thalwar, our communications intern, Kennedy Freeman and Sophie Gomez, our audio engineer, Kato Zane, and myself, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Self-Care Sundays podcast. We'll see you on our next episode where we talk to Chicago-based artist and activist Maxwell M. Case. You won't want to miss it.